Hi everybody, my name is Jens Larsen. It can be very difficult to sound fresh and come up with new ideas when you're comping or when you're harmonizing a minor 2-5-1 cadence. And you really don't want to play the same things all the time. In this video, I'm going to take a look at the first few bars of the famous jazz song Stella by Starlight. And I'm going to take a look at how you can harmonize that famous minor cadence in the beginning of the song and give you some ideas on that. It's going to simply span from the original changes that the composer put there all the way up to some Coltrane changes on those first few bars. Most of the examples that I'm going to cover here are pretty easy to apply to pretty much any minor 2-5-1 cadence you come across, and you can also pretty much throw them in there without having it as part of an arrangement. But of course, some of the more elaborate examples you probably need to have either as an arrangement, but you can also use those as just some insight into how I'm thinking about the chords and how to get your own ideas and that way develop your arrangements and your chord melody playing. If you want to learn more about jazz guitar, improve the way that you solo, check out some interesting arpeggios or chord voicings, then subscribe to my channel. If you want to make sure not to miss anything, then click the little bell notification icon next to the subscribe button. This first example on the journey of making Stella by Starlight into giant steps is the original set of chord changes that Victor Young, the composer, had in the song. I think it's interesting to check out what originally is there very often for standards, because in some ways it's actually more complicated than we think very often, and also we tend to lose a few nuances when we start making everything into 2-5 progressions like they are in the real book. So if you listen to the song, the intro to the song is usually just the tonic chord. So you have some movement which is really just arpeggiating this B flat major chord, then moving into this diminished chord in the beginning. So instead of the minor 2-5, we actually just have a diminished chord. In this case, it's a B flat diminished. The way I would look at it from a theoretical point of view, I have some other videos, and that would be that it's an E diminished, so sharp 4 diminished, in an inversion. So this sound, and that's also something that you can of course use whenever you come across a minor 2-5 to really just turn it into some sort of diminished chord. You can experiment with what will work better for the example that you're playing right now. So that's something that's worthwhile checking out, of course. And also it's a reharmonization that we almost never do, even though we do the other thing where we turn diminished chords into 2-5s all the time. I think that's worth mentioning here because actually the B flat is used as a pedal in the original song. So that stays also on the C minor and the F7, and actually for most of the first 8 bars. So that's really how that works. So the diminished chord is the original thing, and you can really hear how some of the chords that are coming out here are probably chords that we would never really use, like an F7 with a B flat in the bass. But it makes sense here because you have certain things happening in the chord in terms of the voices moving. And I think Victor Young was probably thinking more in that way, and that makes just a lot more sense. And it can also be really worthwhile to start, even if it is a bit complicated, to start thinking like that, and then just seeing what happens if I'm just moving this note down to this one, or I need to be here in 4 bars. What if I go there just in half steps and see what it does with the chords? Thinking like that can be really useful in developing things. It's not the kind of thing you do on the fly. There it's more turn the 2-5 into a dim chord and see how that sounds. But it is worth checking out if you're working with your own arrangements and trying to refine a way you're playing a song with a minor cadence. When I was looking into making this video, I came across a transcription of the original harmony from the original soundtrack, and that video is really fun to see. You can also try and trace the different voice leading things that are happening in the chords, because the chords that are written out are just sort of the normal jazz chords where everything is just put down into bars and you can't really tell what's moving. But if you listen to the song and read the chords, you can probably hear a lot of the stuff that is happening and see if you can see those connections. I think that's that's really useful. And it's just great to have the original harmony written out as well. So I'll link to that video in the description of this video. So before we go all Herbie Hancock and John Coltrane on the chords, then maybe it's also useful to just have a look at what are the most common changes for this song. And that will pretty much be sort of the old real book changes, where the first part of the chord of the song is just E half diminished, A7 to C minor. That's what I'm using here. There's nothing really too fancy happening. I'm using this voicing because it's, for once in a while you can actually use an open E, so you might as well try and use that. So that's what I'm using for the E half diminished, which is essentially just a G minor triad with an A on top, and then A7. And this A7, what would really fit here in B flat major is an A7 from D harmonic minor, which is the same as what you would use if it was still a dim chord. And for the rest, there's not really a lot happening. Yeah, so that's pretty much what's there. You need to, of course, to know that, and it's always good to just explore, well, are there other ways that you can play the minor cadence? I really like this voicing for the 2 chord in a minor 2/5, and you can of course go to this A7 quite easily. The next place we can go after the straight minor 2/5 is probably to start using a different sound on the 2 chord, so in this case on the E half diminished. And that's what I'm doing in this example. So I'm using an E half diminished with a natural 9, which essentially is turning it into a chord out of G melodic minor. So that's that kind of sound, really sort of tonic melodic minor sound. And that is also something you can pretty much always get away with if it doesn't clash with the melody or whatever the soloist is doing, which it most of the time won't actually. So for the rest, I'm not really changing anything. The A7 could still be interpreted as just a harmonic minor. It can also be, of course, this will always fit with also thinking of the A7 as being an altered chord, so really B flat melodic minor. And then the rest is also pretty similar. I'm using, after the minor 2/5, you have C minor 7 to F7, and of course it is really the cadence back to 1, so back to B flat in the piece. But in this case I'm using it, and I think for me it's actually just an old habit, because it's moving further to the cadence to 4, so F minor 7 to B flat 7. And whenever you have that, that means that at that point C minor 7, F7 is kind of like a 5/5, so it has the function of being a straight 2/5 back home, but it also wants to work a little bit as being the 5/5 in E flat. And one way you can use that is that you can start playing the F7 as a Lydian dominant, which is what I'm doing in this example. I did it in the other example as well with this leading chord. So I'm using sort of a Lydian dominant sound on this F7 quite often. A really great way to get a very interesting sound, and also to just reduce the amount of chords in the minor 2/5/1, is to turn it into a Phrygian chord. So really what you're doing here is that you're just taking the 5 as the bass note, so the A in this case, because we have E half diminished to A7, so A, and then a sus4 flat 9 chord on top of that. And of course, really what this boils down to is that we're kind of just playing the 2 chord with the A in the bass, but it's not a very common sound to come across, so in that way it's a nice color to just add there, and that can be a nice change in an arrangement, especially if you have a song like Stella By Starlight, where actually this happens twice, and you don't want to harmonize it the same way twice if you're playing the theme in an arrangement. Then turning it into this Phrygian sound instead of the cadence one time is a really good solution, I think. Here, the way I'm doing it in the beginning, of course, because that's what I'm talking about, and this means that the first two bars becomes sort of a pedal point, so with the A pedal, and the way I'm using that in the arrangement is that I'm sticking with an F pedal on the next two bars. So I'm turning the C minor 7, F7 into sort of an F sus and then an F7, and then moving on from there just with a straight F minor, B flat 7 to E flat to A flat 7. The reason that I can keep on publishing videos every week is that I have a community of people over on Patreon that are supporting the channel. I'm very grateful for that, and if you want to help me keep making videos, then check out my Patreon page. If you join us over on Patreon, I can also give you something in return for your support. Taking the minor cadence and then just pretending that it's actually a cadence in major is also sort of a really smooth way to get some new sounds in there, and again one that you can use pretty much without talking to people and putting it in the arrangement. This is something I do actually all the time when I'm soloing, so if you're playing several choruses and there are a lot of minor 2/5s, then maybe in a second or in a later chorus you want to just start turning some of them into major 2/5 just to have some stuff that's moving out of the key and away from what you're expecting. And that's also what I'm doing here, so really playing this E minor 7 with, of course, the 11 in the melody, but then really with a B in there and with a natural 5, and then just later, actually I'm doing it gradually, because of course you could go directly to an A7, like an altered or a harmonic minor dominant. In this case I'm actually going to a dominant out of the diminished scale, so an A7 with a 13 and a flat 9, and then moving on to C minor and F7. There's not really that much happening in the rest of the arrangement. In the cadence to the 2 chord, I added some movement from F down to D to just have some inner voice movement going on to from the 2 to the 5 when I'm going to E flat. That's also a nice thing to just add in there, and it's fairly easy to get used to them. So that's also something that if you have a few options for this, you can use it in a lot of different places whenever you have a 2/5. But in this case, what this sound is really about is, of course, the E minor sound and the E minor 7. In this case, it's kind of difficult to have like the complete sound where you also have the 9 in there. Without losing something. You could probably do something like almost an E sus, but this is fairly clear, even if I would like to have had the 9 in there as well. You can go even further and then turn it into a minor 13, so then you would have something like, which is of course pretty unstable sound. Oh, sorry, so but that's worth messing around with as well, and that's just taking this idea a little bit further to have the 13 in there, which is at least to me very much like a Herbie Hancock thing, even though you'll find Bill Evans doing it quite a lot as well. So this example is really just using Coltrane Changes on the beginning of Stella By Starlight. And it's using sort of there are two ways you can do this. This is one is using sort of the traditional way of using Coltrane Changes, where you have 2 chords per bar and one is a dominant leading to the next one. It can be a bit of a Sudoku puzzle to get this to fit, at least it was for me. And what I ended up doing was that I added an extra cadence and then it all worked out. So the idea is then, of course, we have as the melody in the beginning, and I'm starting with an F sharp minor, and then that moves up to G7, and and then to C major, up to E flat 7, and then usually you would go to A flat. Here I'm going to D minor because that works with the E flat 7. So instead of having a C minor in the third bar, I go to D minor, to G7, and then sort of delay the C minor 7, F7. And it works with the melody. It's definitely sort of a reharmonization that you're thinking about when you're adding it, and whether you think it's beautiful or whether you just think it's fun to blow on, that's of course something that's up to you. I'm not entirely sure I would necessarily use it in an arrangement, because I think it's a bit forced, but at the same time it's worthwhile checking out when this works, because sometimes you can get it to work in a really nice way. Another one that is very surprising, and that I might actually start using, but you're again here really in the realm of examples where you need to make it into an arrangement. You can't just throw it in there in the third chorus or something like this. Would be to take the first part of it and then use the major thirds and also relate it to the B flat, which is the original key of the piece, of course. So go to D major 7, to B flat major 7, to G flat, and then to F7. That will work a little bit better, I think, as just sounds that will fit with the melody a little bit more, where the fast-moving Coltrane changes are, I think, a little bit, as I said, forced in there. If you have an approach to harmonizing Stella by Starlight that I didn't cover here, then please leave a comment. I'm very curious, at least, and I'm pretty sure that everybody else who's checking out the video are curious as well. And maybe you have like a better solution for the Coltrane changes or just a different take on it. So that's definitely worthwhile checking out, and please leave a comment if you do. If you want to check out how I'm thinking about the changes in Stella by Starlight, because that's really sort of understanding the chords in the context that they're in is essential to coming up with all these variations. And I have this video where I'm analyzing Stella by Starlight that you can check out. If you want to learn more about jazz guitar, and this is the first time you see one of my videos, then subscribe to my channel. If you want to help me keep making videos, then check out my Patreon page. That's about it for this week. Thank you for watching, and until next week.